When the only constant in life is change, you need to be ready. This is the Man-Made Survival Show.
Hello everyone, my name is Jose Prado with Man-Made Survival. Thank you so much for coming back to the channel and watching this video. I want to remind you that we're still trying to get to the 1,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it if you would share this with your friends and family, and if you would leave your subscription here on the podcast. You know, it doesn't really cost you anything, but it really helps me a lot. So I would really appreciate it if you hit that the subscribe button and the bell notification so you can know when we make a new video. And especially like the ones today, like what we're going to be talking about today is really important because people have waited, you know, some people, not everyone, because, you know, there is a community out there of preppers, but the general public, they have been waiting for the very last minute for them to even act on any kind of information that's been put out, you know, not just by channels like mine, like others, but by the mainstream media itself and, you know, other forms of the alternative media. There's an abundance of information out there that really shows everyone the state of the economy, the state of the food shortages and everything's going on, the pandemic and everything. And some people just choose not to listen. You know, as bad as things may be, they're just hoping that it's not gonna get that bad, you know. And even if it is bad, that it's gonna have kind of like its lows and highs, you know. Maybe right now we're going through a low period of time here in the country, you know, because 2020 has been by far the worst year that a lot of people have in their memory. But they're hoping that by 2021 everything is gonna get back up, you know, everything's gonna be okay. Unemployment is going to go down. You know, all the issues that we had been facing this entire year are just going to disappear here in the next 12 months. And the reality is that even though that's a good position to have, you know, mentally trying to see things in a better light, it's not really what is going to happen, or at least not for very many Americans. Because even though not everyone is experiencing the food shortages, you know, and then having to go to the food banks to get food, it could get to that point where everyone in the country will experience that at one point. So what we're going to be talking about today is going to be important. So I encourage you to stay all the way to the end, because at the very end of all of this, I have very important, the last two articles that I have is going to be very important for you to listen to. So I encourage you to stay all the way to the end. And again, share this with your friends and family. But before I continue any further, I want to remind you, or, you know, I want to make the announcement once more. I did in the last podcast that I'm going to start doing this podcast in Spanish as well. So I would really appreciate that if you have any friends or family that would benefit from this podcast being in Spanish, then, you know, if you send them our way, I would really appreciate it, because I do believe that the people, more people being prepared is going to be a better thing for everyone in the country. Like I shared in the previous podcast that I've done when we talked about the food insecurities in South America. There's you know, people who had seen it back in the 80s and they never thought they were going to see it again. Or, you know, they fled their country to go to a different country that was more prosperous, but, you know, the food shortages and everything reached them there, so they never thought they were going to suffer through it. So I want to make it to where the culture of preparedness is both in the Hispanic community and the American community. You know, and the American community is pretty strong, but I want it to be stronger, because there's only about 3.5 million Americans who say they're preppers, right? And we want that number to be far greater than that, because if everyone in the country is a prepper, then everything would be a lot better as far as, you know, a disaster is concerned, because people will be more prepared. They would know exactly what to do, and then they can just react instead of, they can act instead of react. All right, so the same thing goes in the Hispanic community. I want it to be to where instead of suffering through poverty, you know, on the lows, when the country, everything is going to crap, when they go back up into the better times, that's the time they're prepared, and they have everything that they need, because, you know, they're already experiencing bad times. But if they get prepared for when it gets even worse, then they're going to be better off than people who don't prepare. And that's exactly what we have seen all throughout South America. We're seeing that all throughout the world, even here in the United States. All right, so that's why I want to get into it. Now, before I get into the articles and everything like that, I want to remind you about the partner that we have for this podcast is greenmedicineencyclopedia.com. Green Medicine Encyclopedia is a science-based encyclopedia providing research evidence for nutritional medicine and natural health therapies. We partner with Green Medicine Works to bring you the best medical encyclopedia money can buy in case you have a crap the fan scenario or an incident where you require immediate medical attention. This encyclopedia is filled with cures and remedies for all kinds of ailments. When the supply chain stops and there's no more pharmacists or doctors, you'll be glad you bought your own copy of Green Medicine Encyclopedia. Man-made survival preppers get a special $40 discount with a coupon code Man-made Survival. All right, so why is today very, very important? Because there has been projections that has come out. You know, even though this podcast has talked about food shortages in just recent videos, the information today makes it even more important because projections have come out. You know, in the past videos that I've made about this issue, it was more of a immediate, within the next 2-3 months, this is what we're seeing. This was we have experienced throughout the pandemic so far. But now what I have in front of me that I'm going to be sharing with you, these are projections. You know, some of them are a year projection, others are 10-year projection. And really, my assessment of all of that is that some of those issues are going to be a lot sooner than what they're projecting, or at least in my opinion. All right, so that's why I want to share this information with you today, so you can make that educated guess where you can have the information available to you. You know exactly what's going on, and you can prepare accordingly. Because if you don't have all the information, then you're not going to know what is going on. All right. So in the past, 8-9 months since the pandemic started, at least here in the United States, we saw a trend of things going on. First, people panic bought a lot of things. The first cities that happened, of course, it was the major cities. Like New York, Washington State, California. People just went to Costco, went to Walmart, went to other places. They bought everything that they thought that they needed. And the sad thing is that they bought everything that they didn't need, or at least not to that extent. Everything from toilet paper to paper towels, cleaning supplies, everything got wiped out. And then the second, I guess you can say, wave of panic buying is when everybody started realizing, holy crap, I'm gonna need food at the house because we're gonna be locked down for a while. So everyone went out there. Canned foods flew off the shelves. Meat did the same thing. And then when the pandemic, or at least people started having cases at packaging plants and stuff like that, they started shutting down. Then we saw the problem with ranchers and farmers and dairy farmers, with having to dump either all the produce or dumping all the milk. And that created shortages. Then the meat packaging facilities shut down for a while, and then it was such a dramatic thing that President Donald Trump had to step in, do an executive order, and say, okay, all the meat processing plants, you have to stay open. Doesn't matter if you have COVID or not, you must stay open, because we were seeing a projection that the food prices were going to skyrocket, very crazy in the meat. And other products. So since Trump came in and he intervened, he opened them. Then prices didn't go as high as they were, but they did go up. So in some places about 70% higher than they were before everything started shutting down. So that trend of food shortages stayed with us. It didn't really resolve everything, but it was an issue that we had to really deal with. And now that we have problems with the farmers, not just here in the United States, but in other countries, because we import some stuff, we use some stuff that our farmers make, we take it to China to get processed and canned and everything. Even we're having shortages of aluminum for the canning, so that's creating problems with the grocery stores. So, anyways, all of that to say this: even more food shortages are coming. All right, and we're seeing it that it's going to be a greater impact, because if we go on a second lockdown, whether Trump wins or Biden wins, which it would be more likely under Biden because he said that we would lock down again. If we do go through a second lockdown, everything that we have seen so far and spend all the $5, $6, $7 trillion that we spend this year, it's going to increase even more in the next year. So that high that I was speaking of a minute ago, where people are just hoping that they're gonna be to that point next year, we may not even get there. We're probably still going down the slope. So we really have to buckle up and pay attention to what's going on, because this could be a problem that pretty much stretches for the next 10 years. And that's not bringing into account a war, which is something that I'm going to be talking about in the next podcast. All right. So the first headline that I have for you is this: global food prices rise as famine threats emerges. This from Zero Hedge. In August, UN World Food Program, which is the WFP, Director David Beasley warned that $5 billion in emergency funds are needed within 6 months to avert a global famine. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently said that the world is experiencing one of the worst crises in 5 decades. The virus-related downturn is driving wealth inequality to extremes and pushing millions of people into extreme poverty. Food insecurity risk produced by soaring prices and disrupted supply chain because of the virus pandemic are not limited to the U.S. A top food bank in the country recently warned that a nationwide meal shortage in the next 12 months. And throughout history, food prices volatility and disruptions have often resulted in social unrest, and an unintended consequence of the global downturn could be a continuation of a social unrest seen across the world. All right, so that is really important. There's several things in that article that I picked out that you should really pay attention to. One is that this is going to be a global pandemic, a global famine, not just local, where we're used to seeing, in the news and TV shows and stuff like that, where pretty much it always happens to be in Africa or in the Middle East in some cases. But no, this is becoming in pretty much a global thing, because we are seeing, as far as the farmers are concerned, we have seen reports that I've even done here in China, in Australia, here in the United States, in Mexico, in South America, in other countries around the world, where it has been so bad that countries are stopping exports of their grains and stuff, because they don't want to run out of food for their people. They want to make sure they have enough food for their people first before they even export. And then that issue came pretty much into light when Australia and the Philippines had to have talks, Thailand, not the Philippines, Thailand have to have talks so they can still, trade rice back and forth, because Thailand said that they were not going to do it. But, a phone call from the Prime Minister of Australia, then as far as we know, there's going to be, trading going on that. But the point was that even if Thailand said, you know what, we don't have enough, I'm very sorry Australia, but we cannot give you any rice, the people of Australia would have run out of rice within 1 year. So, that's why it's important for us to pay attention. So it's not just, in some African country where people don't really care much about. This is happening in the West, in the Western Hemisphere. This happened all over the world. So that's why it's important that he said that. Now, the next thing that he said in that article is that it's pushing people into extreme poverty. And we're seeing that in the United States. All right, I'm going to bring things home to the United States. We're seeing the extreme poverty problem here. With 50 million people unemployed, there's reports saying that it has gone down. Some other reports have said that it hasn't gone down at all. The point is that the people who are going through it, they're the one experiencing this. And it's about, at least from 20 to 50 million people, depending on who you listen to when the report comes out. So that is very important, because as the article says, we know that food scarcity creates problems as far as social unrest. All right, as I'm going to be showing you here, when I read the next headline, I'm going to be reading the article, but on the video. If you're watching this on YouTube, on Brighteon, or any other social media that does video, then you're going to see that while I'm reading this, I'm going to put clips from Venezuela when they started running out of food and how the people were reacting. All right, because it's very important, because you have to prepare for this so your children don't go hungry. Now, if you're listening to this on iHeartRadio or all the other podcast platforms that don't do video, then I would really encourage you to visit us on brighteon.com, or you can visit us on YouTube, and you can really watch the video so you can get the bigger picture on what I'm talking about. All right, and before I move on to the next headline, which pretty much goes hand in hand with what I just read, is that a top food bank in the country recently warned of a nationwide meal shortage in the next 12 months. All right, so there's the first projection, the 12-month projection, which, if we were to really look at it, this is going to set us off to the next winter or, fall. And the reason I want to point that out is because once we go again, we hit spring again, then you're really going to have to make sure that you grow your own food for the next year. And, especially if you're in one of these families that will not be able to get a lot of help, that might have meal shortages, as this article is saying. If you do that right now and you make sure that you have everything in place for you to be able to grow your own food, you're going to be better, in a much better shape next winter when the meal shortages pretty much are peaking and everything probably gets a little bit worse than what we're seeing now, which is just a projection. But as you're going to see, even if for some miracle they don't miss those meals that they're saying, and within the next 10 years, food prices will rise so high that your purchasing power won't be the same as it is today. All right, so the next headline that I have for you comes from the End of the American Dream, and it reads, it is being projected that there could be an 8 billion meal shortage at America's food banks over the next 12 months. All right, so before I get into the article, that is very important for you to pay attention to. 8 billion meal shortage. All right, so before I get into it, we have to really address why that is happening. One of the main reasons is because the food banks are having a much greater volume of people coming through. They're having if before the pandemic they were doing a couple 100,000 people, a month or a year, whatever it is that they projected as. Now they're having 1 million meals just in 1 month. Okay, so that's probably how they're projecting it, and they're seeing that since they're having so much volume, they don't have enough people donating anymore. For one, because people don't have the money, and two, the grocery stores, they no longer have the extra to give out because they are experiencing shortages, because the farmers are experiencing problems at the farm, and since the supply chain is being broken on every step of the way, the end result where you go buy it at the grocery store, that's where you're gonna feel the pain. That's where you have to prepare it, and that's where these food banks are feeling the pain too. So since the grocery stores are no longer giving out food, which would include Walmart and all the other big brands, they have to go and purchase it themselves as if they were customers. And in one of the reports, I don't remember if I put it on here, they're spending over $1 million just to get enough food to give away. All right, so that's why it's important for us to pay attention to that, because it could get to the point where the food banks could run out of money and no longer be able to afford to feed people. All right, keep that in mind, because that's going to be very important later on in this podcast. Feeding America, the nation's largest food relief organization, is warning of a 6 billion to 8 billion meal shortage over the next 12 months, which could leave millions of Americans hungry amid the pandemic. The dire shortages comes as tens of millions of Americans have turned to local food banks for help amid the pandemic triggered surge in unemployment and food insecurity. To me, that is a number that is almost unimaginable. How in the world are we going to make up an 8 billion meal shortfall? And of course, that number assumes that things won't get dramatically worse in our society next year. If they do, a true number could end up being far greater. All right, so that is important for us to pay attention to, because it is something that could get that bad. All right, because right now we're in 2020 election. We're expecting that in the next 3 weeks, social unrest is going to get really, really bad. Because if Trump wins, then Antifa and everybody else has come out and say that they're going to pretty much burn down the country. So that's going to create problems. And one of the problems that we have seen is that truck drivers, for one, a lot of those companies have shut down, or not a lot, but quite a few. and two, they're refusing to go to any of these areas that's gonna get this bad. Especially the police get funded in those areas. They're saying we're not going. So if they don't go in there and they don't deliver goods, then the people in the major cities are the ones that are going to feel the most pain. Because as opposed to rural areas where we're not seeing those problems with Antifa and stuff, they will deliver there. But the major cities like California, Portland, and all those that we're seeing, all those fires going on and all those fighting going on and all the killing that's been going on, then they're not going to deliver. And then the people there, the regular citizens who either don't care or, they're out of the way, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most. Now, that's why you have to pay attention to this podcast and share it with your friends and family, because if they live in those areas, they have to get prepared for it now, just in case there's disruptions. All right, so that 8 billion meal shortfall. When are we going to feel the pain? We're going into the winter months. And of course, it is natural for farms not to be producing at this time, right? They make enough, or they produce enough throughout the summer in order for them to be able to have enough to send it to the processors and send it to grocery stores and places like that, so they can be food pretty much year round. But since we're going through the winter, and if we start seeing shortages in the food because there's not enough going through the canners or whatever the case may be, then we can expect people to become more angry. Now, here's the thing, though. Now that I think about it, if Trump wins and he goes, January 2021, and he's again, inaugurated or whatever, then for the next 4 years, he's going to have a crisis on his hands. Everything that has been happening with the pandemic now, that's still going to go on for another 1-2 years, however long it is, since they decide to lift restrictions and the vaccine comes out and then people get vaccinated and all those things, whether you want to do it or not. Pretty much the government is saying when this comes out, then that's when the pandemic is over. That's why I'm putting that as a benchmark. All right. So even if we do have a vaccine, January 2021, Trump is still going to have to deal with the repercussions of all the spending we have done just this year alone. As I mentioned earlier, about $5 to $7 trillion has been spent on the pandemic, on stimulus, on bailing people out, airplanes or airlines and all those. So all of that is going to drag on for the next 4 years. We're going to feel that pain. But if Joe Biden comes into power, then he's going to have to deal with it. All right. Now he did come out and say that he's going to increase taxes. He's going to give away even more money. He's going to spend even more than Trump did, just in 1 year. The point is that whichever way you look at it, when you are projecting it to see how it's going to be for the next 4 years, it doesn't matter who wins, then there's going to be more spending. There's going to be taxes raised on everyone, because we cannot spend this much money without raising taxes. And the people who are suffering right now the most are going to suffer even more. All right, so that's what we have to pay attention now, especially you. If you're still working, you have to be ready today. Now, the next headline that I have for you is how people are seeing, when they find themselves in that situation, it's not just them. All right. One of the things that we always see in the prepper community when we're doing logos, when we're seeing, things about preparedness, is always the one person, whether it's just a male or a female. It tends to be more males that are portrayed in logos and stuff. But in reality, it's not just one person who's trying to survive. It's a family. It's not just, the husband or the lone wolf, whatever you want to call them. It's always also the spouse, the wife, and the children. And when things get that tough, the ones who suffer the most are the children, and psychologically it's going to be the parents, because they cannot give their kids something to eat. I've experienced that myself. And I can tell you right now that it's the worst feeling you could ever have. That your children tell you that they're hungry and you cannot feed them anything because you have nothing to give them. It really breaks your heart. That's one of the big reasons why I became a prepper. Because when my child, I've given this story in the past, but I'm just going to give you the quick one right now. When I was in Mexico and I could not give my child At that time, he was 2 years old. Anything to eat because I had nothing, because I hadn't even eaten myself. I have nothing to give him. I feel horrible. I felt as a failure. You feel all these kind of different feelings, but the worst of them is the one that you see your child telling you that they're hungry, they're crying about being hungry, and there's nothing you can do about it. Here's the next headline: My kids are starving. Food banks and pantries see explosive demand in North Carolina as pandemic continues. This from CNBC.com. One of the most terrifying points of 2020 for Christian Solins was not that she was unemployed as a result of pregnancy complications following the birth of her son in January. It was not when she was working as a waitress serving customers in March as the coronavirus pandemic began to rip through the U.S., and it was not when she lost her job just 2 weeks after returning to work when North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper issued statewide stay-at-home orders. No, the worst moment came when Solins, a 32-year-old mother of two, ran out of food. Quote, quite literally, we had nothing on our account, 5 mouths to feed, and no income. It was just really bad time. At that point, my kids were hungry, and I was just like, listen, I just had a baby. I've been out of work for 3 weeks. I have no income. My kids are starving. I need food. I have to do something. You can always make exceptions for yourself, saying, I'll eat tomorrow. You're an adult. You can put it off. But what are you going to tell your child? It's not that easy, end quote, Solin says. Federal programs such as Supplemental Nutritional Assistance, which is SNAP, the Special Supplemental Nutritional Program for Women, WIC, and the Infant and Children and the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TEFAP, are helping. In May, North Carolina increased SNAP benefits to the maximum available based on family size. A family of 4, for example, was eligible to receive a total of $646 a month. All right, so the government is helping. They're helping the best of their ability. We're spending trillions of dollars, or not trillions, but billions of dollars on EBT, food stamps, whatever you want to call it. Not just in North Carolina, but all throughout the country. And because of the pandemic, they have raised the maximum, and in North Carolina, it's $646 a month. Now, to me, that's a pretty good bit of money for groceries, and that's great. What I've been telling people throughout the pandemic in this podcast, when the reports came out, when they were going to do that at the beginning of the pandemic, back in April, I think it was, or even May, that they were going to give the pandemic EBT, they were going to raise the EBT money and everything. I told people, you really need to set aside some of that money so you can stock up for later on, because that is eventually going to end. And in some cases, it has ended. If I'm not mistaken, in North Carolina, it ends in October. So, in this month, by the end of October, they won't receive that increase of the maximum for a family of 4. So it may go down to whatever they used to get. It may stay the same. Who knows? The point is that it's eventually going to end. They're not going to get the help all the time. And in some cases, EBT and SNAP and all those programs, they do have a time limit depending on where you are. Some states have a longer period of time. Some states is really short. So depending on where you are is how long you get that help. But eventually, the help is going to end, whether it's because you met the time period or because the government is so broke it cannot help anyone anymore. Now, when I was talking about a minute ago that we can get in the projections 10 years out, here's that headline. Food shortages simulation predicts 400% increase in food prices by 2030. This is from Zero Hedge. Recently, I wrote an article discussing the looming food crisis in the United States and the rest of the world. While it might seem like paranoia to some readers, the information provided in the article is very real. In fact, I'm not the only one that's been thinking about it. Back in 2015, 65 people showed up at the World Wildlife Fund's headquarters in Washington, D.C. These individuals were international policymakers, corporate businessmen, academics, and leaders in thought. Their goal? To run a simulation of a world food crisis that would begin in 2020 and run to 2030. The press release of the event was published on the big AG Corporation Cargill website and revealed that the food shortages simulation that the decade between 2020 and 2030 would see two major food crises. During this time, prices will rise 400% of the long-term average. All right, so why is this important? Because they did this study back in 2015. So 5 years ago, they went and looked and say, well, listen, we believe that in 2020 to 2030, our simulation says that prices are going to increase about 400%. And that is very important that we pay attention to that because, for one, why did they start doing that? No idea. But two, is that really gives us a heads up on what was going on. I mean, I never heard about that that study or anything like that, 5 years ago. So, I'm 5 years too late listening to it and preparing for it, quote unquote, because as I've always mentioned here in this podcast, when you hear the news about something bad that could happen or a simulation or anything like that, then you have that time period from the time you heard it to the time it happens for you to get prepared. Now, they're saying that would happen between 2020 and 2030. So we're within the time frame, 10 years. Now, how bad will it get in the next 1, 2, 3 years? We don't know. But within the next 10 years, that means that it's going to get 400%. Now, in some years, it might get greater than 400%. In some years, it might be less than 400%. I guess it depends on the market. But the point is that they're taking the average would be about 400%. And they're applying that to the supply chain, to the food and everything. And that's really going to determine how much stuff is going to cost. All right. So if you watch the previous podcast, I kind of hinted into this because I believe it's very, very important. Now, you're gonna see on your screen, and for people who are listening to this on the podcast, you can go to usinflationcalculator.com, and you can really see how much the value of your dollar would decrease if that 400% increase was to be applied to the food supply chain. All right, so that calculation says that if in 1974 I purchased an item for $646, then in 2020 the same item would cost $3,405.82. Cumulative rate of inflation is 427.2%. All right, so why did I do it that way? The reason that I did it that way is because I was trying to find the inflation rate that we have seen, from previous years, because we know that our dollar has been devalued since 1913. Since the last Great Depression, since the Fed came along. When you make the comparison from money to gold, our money has been devalued by 95%. And I shared 99%. I shared that with you in the previous podcast. All right, so that's why I kind of adjusted the years to see at what point we would hit 400%. But between 1974 and 1975, it gave me between 380 and 427. So I decided to go with 1974 at 427%. Now, why did I do $646? If you remember, just a few minutes ago, I read how much the state of North Carolina is giving families on the maximum for a family of four, $646. All right, so if within the next 10 years, we're going to see an increase of 400%. Then what you're going to be able to buy right now with $646, a 400 increase would be as if you spent $3,405 to get the exact same items, right? To spend the exact same money. Now, the next image that you're going to see on your screen is that I did how much it would cost, right? It's the same year, but I changed the number on the purchase item because I wanted to see how much it would cost for $646. Now, the purchasing power decreased. So whatever you can buy right now for $646 will decrease to what you can buy right now with $122.55. That's still the same 427.2% increase in inflation. All right, so pay close attention to that image, because that is exactly what you're going to be seeing in the next few years. Instead of you being able to buy $646 worth of groceries, as of today, you would only be able to buy $122.55 worth of groceries. That is a great decrease on how many groceries you can buy. Now, if you remember, I have been pretty much driving this home every time I've talked about the economy and the food situation in the United States when I compare it to Venezuela. That's exactly what they have been going through. That's exactly what they have been experiencing. And that's exactly what I've been warning about. All right. So one of the articles that I read to you in the previous podcast, and I hope you've been here for a while now, so you know what I'm talking about, is that at one point, Venezuela experienced a 10 million inflation rate. 10 million. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's true. All right. We cannot say that is not possible, because it's happened. It's been happening around the world. All right. Zimbabwe, they have actually had a very horrible time too. But not just that. Here in the United States, how would that look? Well, if we hit hyperinflation, that's one of the things that I've been warning about for a while now. That if we keep spending the money that we have been spending just here in the past few years, we're going to get to that point eventually. Now, they're fighting in the Congress and the Senate and the White House. They're fighting about how much money to spend. The Trump administration says they don't want to spend a lot of money, so they say that they want to spend $1.8 trillion. That's a lot of freaking money. But when you try to compare it to how much Nancy Pelosi is trying to spend, last time I heard, she's trying to spend $2.4 trillion so they can have some type of negotiation, so they can come to terms with the negotiations. They're pretty much getting closer together. That gap has decreased, because it used to be $3.5 trillion from what Nancy Pelosi wanted to be, as opposed to Trump. He only wanted like 500 billion, something like that. But anyways, the point is that money is going to be spent. And right now we're at $27 trillion. So if we add another, let's say Nancy Pelosi wins another $2.4 trillion, then we're going to get really close to 30 trillion just right before the year ends. Because Trump said that he's going to put it off until after the election, and then they're going to make a choice, and then they're going to come to negotiating again, and maybe they'll pass it. Let's say they do pass it, right before Christmas. That would be, let's say Trump wins, and that's Trump's Christmas present to the entire country. Another stimulus check before Christmas. Right before the year ends, we're going to hit that almost $30 trillion of debt. So that's really going to be devastating for us long term. It might help us short term, but it's going to be devastating long term. Now, one of the things that I want to point out, because I ran into this when I was doing the research for all of this, is that I was proven right when I made my assessment about what would happen in EMP. I encourage you to watch that video. I will leave the link below this one, because in that video, I did my assessment on what would happen during an EMP and why so many people would die so quickly. Because as I've said in the past, the EMP Commission came out and say that within 24-month period, about 90% of the country, 95% of the country would perish, because, there would be no power, there would be no pharmaceuticals, no doctors, no nothing. And one of the main things that I pretty much based my podcast on that day is that there was going to be no pharmaceuticals whatsoever. Now, I read into this headline. Here it is. As job loss strips Americans of health insurance, diabetics turn to insulin sharing underground. This from DallasNews.com. All right, so I'm not going to get into that article right now, but I did want to point it out. So pretty much what the article is saying is that there's this lady who pretty much had to go underground, and by underground it means that they had to find people who have extra insulin to give out, because those diabetics, they have extra because they have insurance. They're not using as much because they're eating more healthy, they're exercising more, whatever the case may be. They end up with extra insulin, so they're giving it away for free, which of course is an excellent thing, because they are helping fellow human beings to able to survive, because they need the insulin very badly. All right, so that was one of the things that I shared on that podcast, that there's going to be the lack of insulin that's going to kill a lot of people. The lack of pharmaceuticals is going to kill a lot of people. Something as simple as just an inhaler could kill people. So in an EMP, that's what could happen. So you have to make sure that you watch that video and that you make preparations accordingly, especially if your family is heavily dependent on pharmaceuticals. So I wanted to bring that and make sure that you knew about it. That it seemed that I was correct in my assessment on what I was thinking that would happen. And of course, I went into a lot more detail than that. All right, but moving on. The last headline that I have for you tonight is very important because, again, all of this that I've been saying for a while now, from the beginning of this podcast until now, all those of you who have been here the entire time, you understand that I've said this, that one day we're going to get to this point, and we're already here. The U.S. debt is now projected to be larger than the U.S. economy. This from CNN.com. Quote, the U.S. federal budget is on an unsustainable path, has been for some time, end quote. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said this week, but Powell added, quote, this is not the time to give priority to those concerns, end quote. All right, before I continue with that with the article, just listening to those words should really worry you, because what does that mean? That they're just gonna keep on printing money, because the reason that they're in the predicament that they find themselves right now with all the spending that they're doing is, one, they're blaming it on the pandemic, but two, we were gonna hit this cliff, a long time ago, but they have been being able to kick down the can down the road because of all the money printing that they're doing. But I've said this time after time that eventually the money printing won't be enough, because now they're creating hyperinflation, and we would already hit the hyperinflation mark if the United States was not the world's reserve currency and we were not number one in the world with the economy, the military, and everything else. All right, so mark my words, when the U.S. dollar no longer becomes, or is no longer the reserve currency for the entire world, we will feel the same pain the Venezuelans are feeling right now. The article goes on to say, the Treasury Department won't put out final numbers for fiscal year 2020 until later this month, but if the CBO's estimates are on mark, the country's total debt owed to investors, which is essentially the sum of annual deficit that has occurred over the years, will have outpaced the size of the economy, coming in at nearly 102% of GDP, according to calculations from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Quote, debt is the size of the economy today, and soon it will be larger than any time in history, end quote. The problem with such high debt levels going forward is that they will increasingly constrain what the government can do to meet the country's needs. All right, pay attention to the next few. Given the risk of future disruptions like a pandemic, a debt load that already is outpacing economic growth puts the country at greater risk of a fiscal crisis, which in turn will require sharp cuts in services and benefits on which Americans rely. Quote, there is no set tipping point at which a fiscal crisis becomes likely or imminent, nor is there an identifiable point in which interest costs as much as percentage of GDP become unsustainable, end quote. CBO Director Phil Swaggle said last month, quote, but as the debt grows, the risk becomes greater, end quote. All right, so that last part was very, very important, because it's exactly what I've been saying, not just throughout this podcast, but in previous podcasts since I started this. All right, so I guess I would say that I'm pretty much on the money when I say that would actually happen, that the government would no longer be able to help. Why? Because they cannot afford it. We cannot print ourselves, or we're printing ourselves into oblivion, but still expecting to be able to cover, things like Medicaid, Medicare, pensions, and more importantly, food stamps. So that's why it's important for us to get ourselves into position right now for when, that happens, So one of the things that we can learn from Venezuela, as my closing remarks through all of this, is that the people who live in the city are the people who pretty much suffer the most. All right, there's people in Venezuela that own land, they have their cattle. They're pretty much trying to live a self-sustained lifestyle as much as they can, with the government messing with them and everything. But, they're trying to make it happen. And they are better off than people who are in the city who have no space for a garden whatsoever, no space for any type of livestock or anything like that. So it would really be beneficial for you to get into place where you can actually have a house that has at least 5 acres that can support livestock, and it has enough room for everybody. And you can actually have a garden big enough that it's going to produce not just what you're going to eat during the summer, but also what's going to feed you through the winter, and where you can save the seeds, and that you can continue this cycle going through until the government comes out with a new system where the money is not crap, where where a carton of eggs, like in Venezuela, doesn't cost you $400,000 or bolivares in their currency. You have to position yourself for that right now, today. And if you have to make things happen, then, it looks like you have 5 years or less. All right. One of the reasons I say that it's 5 years or less is because we also have a war that we may be going into on top of that. And that's just going to make things a lot worse now. That could be the Achilles heel of the United States. Because what happened to Germany, the reason, one of the reasons that I've always been taught is that one of the reasons that Germany actually lost is because they ran out of money. They ran out of money for the war. They could no longer afford the war anymore. So that's one of the things that pretty much made it collapse. All right. So if that is true, because I'm going by memory, and this is years of school in the past. But the point is that if that is true, can we get to a point in the United States where we are no longer be able to afford the military, therefore we lose in a military conflict? Right? They're saying that within the next 10 years, the prices would increase 400%. I am saying that it would be not 10 years away, but probably 5. And we know that wars always create famines. Right? Because if the war breaks out between Russia, China, and the United States, you can bet that there won't be any trading going on. There won't be no exports, no imports, anything like that. Everywhere is going to be frozen wherever it is. And we know that if war breaks out between those nations, more than likely, there won't be any actual warnings other than what we're seeing on the news. Because, they're talking about it. They're saying it's going to happen, but we won't know when it's going to happen until we see the ICBM land somewhere. Whether it's, from us to them or from them to us. And the moment that happens, everything freezes around the world. So whatever you're going to have at home, wherever you're going to be when that happens is where you're going to have to sustain yourself and your family. All right, so I'm going to be talking about this into detail in the next podcast, and I'm recording this back to back. You'll notice that in the past 3, I had the same shirt because I'm recording them all on the same day. Because all this information came out over the weekend. I was busy, not just working on this, but, working on a side job, and bring you all this information is time consuming. And I'm doing it all at once because I'm also adding the Spanish section to all of this. All right, so that's even more work. So I would really appreciate it if you would like this video, share this video with your friends and family, and come back and listen to the next podcast that I have for you because it's very important information. All right, I'm going to give you kind of a sneak peek here at the end. I hope you stayed all the way to the end. Did you know, or have you heard by now, by the time you listen to the next podcast, or this podcast even, that the United States is preparing itself by creating a Asian NATO? They're getting themselves ready for that war because Russia, China, and the United States keep saying that there's going to be a war very soon, especially because of Taiwan. All right, so we have to get ourselves ready. How long do we have? We don't know. It could be months, it could be weeks, it could be days, it could be hours, it could be years. We don't know. The point is that the time frame for you to prepare, or the window of opportunity for you to prepare, is closing even faster than we thought ever before. All right, so please come back to the next podcast. Share this with your friends and family. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Doesn't cost you anything, but really helps me a lot. We're trying to get to the 1,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it if you help me out on that. Share this in your social media because people need to know this information. And also, I want to remind you about the store that we have. It's manmansurvivalstore.com. You're going to find everything that you're going to need for your preparedness on there. All right, and we're getting ready for Christmas too. We're going to be changing a few things. So I would really appreciate it if you would consider making a purchase through the site. Also, I'm giving away the book for a book for free. It's Preppers Secrete Cache. You can go to www.prepperssecretcache.com. Again, the book is absolutely free. All we need help is with shipping. So you need to get this information in your hands, or get it for somebody and give it to them. I'm giving it away for free. You can give it away for free too. So I would really appreciate it if you did that. All right. So again, I'm gonna leave you with those remarks. Remember, get ready, get prepared, and remember, always be ready.
The Man-Made Survival Show.